Richard Sterling strode into the Manhattan Supreme Court like a king arriving for his coronation, not a defendant facing divorce. On his arm hung Veronica, his young mistress, flashing a diamond ring worth a fortune. He believed his ironclad prenup made him invincible against Catherine, his quiet wife of 25 years. He was utterly wrong. Within hours, a deafening silence would descend as the judge revealed a devastating secret, stripping the billionaire to his bones. Richard expected freedom, but he walked into a trap that would cost him everything. You think you know how divorce court works? You have no idea. The atmosphere outside the New York County Supreme Court on the 14th of October 2024 was electric, bordering on hysterical. It wasn't every day that a man worth $4.2 billion decided to turn his divorce proceedings into a red carpet event. Richard Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Hale Dynamics, a logistics and shipping conglomerate that effectively moved half of America's consumer goods, stepped out of a black Maybach. He paused. He buttoned his bespoke Italian suit jacket, a charcoal gray Tom Ford that screamed power, and waited. A second later, a leg appeared. Then the rest of Veronica Miller emerged. Veronica was stunning. There was no denying that. At 24, she was an Instagram model with vague credentials, but a very specific talent for spending money. She wore a white dress that was perhaps a little too short for court, and oversized sunglasses that she didn't take off, even though the sky was overcast. Richard, is it true Catherine is asking for half? A reporter from the Post shouted, thrusting a microphone over the police barricade. Richard smiled, a shark baring its teeth. He didn't answer directly. He just squeezed Veronica's waist and whispered something in her ear that made her giggle. The message was clear. Let her ask. She won't get a dime. Inside the courtroom, the air was stale, recycled, and tense. Richard's legal team was already assembled, a phalanx of legal warfare led by Arthur Penhaligon. Arthur was a man who didn't just practice law. He bludgeoned opponents with it. He charged $1,500 an hour and had never lost a high-profile divorce case in 3 decades. He sat at the defense table, arranging his files with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a heart transplant. "She's late," Richard muttered, checking his Patek Philippe watch. He drummed his fingers on the mahogany table. Typical. She's trying to make an entrance. It's pathetic. Veronica leaned over, chewing gum slightly too loudly. "Maybe she's crying in the car, Richie. I would be. I mean, look at us." Richard smirked. "She's not crying. Catherine doesn't cry. She just fades. That's what she's done for the last 10 years. Faded into the wallpaper while I built an empire." The doors at the back of the courtroom didn't bang open. They simply unlatched with a heavy thud. The silence Richard had expected didn't happen immediately. There was a shuffling of feet, a clearing of throats. But then, Catherine Sterling walked in. She was 49, though she looked younger, possessed of a timeless, cold beauty that Richard had once loved and now found infuriatingly dull. She wore no jewelry, no makeup to hide the lines around her eyes. She wore a navy blazer, tailored but modest, and dark trousers. She looked like a school teacher, or perhaps a librarian. She was alone. No entourage, no PR team. Just Catherine, clutching a battered brown leather briefcase that looked like it had survived the 1990s. Richard let out a short, derisive laugh. "Look at her," he whispered to Arthur. "She didn't even hire a stylist. She's walking to her execution in off-the-rack polyester." Arthur Penhaligon didn't laugh. He pushed his glasses up his nose, his eyes narrowing as he watched Catherine walk down the center aisle. "Don't get cocky, Richard," Arthur murmured. "Where is her counsel? Maybe she's representing herself?" Veronica suggested, loud enough for the front row of the gallery to hear. A few people snickered. Catherine reached the plaintiff's table. She set the battered briefcase down. She didn't look at Richard. She didn't look at Veronica. She sat down, folded her hands on the table, and stared straight ahead at the empty judge's bench. "Catherine," Richard called out across the aisle, his voice dripping with condescension. "If you need money for a cab ride home later, just ask Arthur. We're not monsters." Catherine slowly turned her head. Her eyes were hazel, flecked with green, and completely unreadable. She looked at Richard for 3 seconds, long enough to make him shift in his chair, and then turned back to the front without saying a word. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed. Judge Harrison P. Wexler entered the room. Wexler was a legend in New York family law. He was 70 years old, with a face carved from granite and a reputation for having absolutely zero patience for theatrics. He adjusted his robes, sat down, and peered over his spectacles. Docket number 4,492. Wexler grumbled. Sterling versus Sterling. Let's get on with it. I have a murder trial starting at 2, and frankly, that will likely be more cheerful than this. Arthur Penhaligon stood up, smoothing his tie. Your Honor, Arthur Penhaligon for the defendant. Mr. Richard Sterling, we are prepared to proceed. We have a prenuptial agreement signed 25 years ago, which clearly states— I know what it states, Mr. Penhaligon, Judge Wexler interrupted, waving a hand. I can read. Who is representing Mrs. Sterling? The room went quiet. Everyone looked at Catherine. She stood up slowly. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft but clear. It carried to the back of the room without a microphone. I have legal counsel, Your Honor, Catherine said. She is currently parking her car. The press outside made arrival difficult. We're on a schedule, Mrs. Sterling, the judge snapped. I am here, Your Honor. The voice came from the back doors. It was sharp, authoritative, and familiar. Heads turned. Richard twisted in his seat. Even Arthur Penhaligon froze. Walking down the aisle was not a high-priced Manhattan divorce shark. It wasn't a television lawyer. It was a woman in her 60s, wearing a tweed suit and carrying a cane. Is that— Richard squinted. Is that the charity lawyer, the one who does the soup kitchens? It was. It was Beatrice Halloway. She was known in New York not for billion-dollar divorces, but for suing slumlords on behalf of evicted tenants. She was a people's lawyer, usually found in small claims court, not the Supreme Court. Richard started laughing. He actually laughed out loud. Beatrice Halloway? Catherine, are you serious? You brought a tenant rights lawyer to a billion-dollar asset division? Beatrice ignored him. She limped slightly as she made her way to the table, patting Catherine on the shoulder before sitting down. Beatrice Halloway for the plaintiff, Your Honor, she said, her voice raspy. Sorry for the delay. The paparazzi blocked the handicap ramp. Judge Wexler looked intrigued. Miss Halloway, it's been a while. I didn't know you handled high-net-worth divorce cases. I don't, usually. Beatrice smiled, a sweet, grandmotherly expression that didn't reach her eyes. But for Catherine, I made an exception. We are ready to proceed. Richard leaned back, crossing his legs. He whispered to Veronica, This is going to be easier than I thought. I'll be drinking scotch on the yacht by 3 p.m. He had no idea that the yacht was already the subject of the document, sitting inside Catherine's battered leather briefcase. The first hour of the trial was exactly what everyone expected, a slaughter. Or at least it appeared to be. Arthur Penhaligon was in his element. He paced the floor, presenting documents with a flourish. He painted a picture of Richard Sterling as the sole genius behind Sterling Hale Dynamics. Your Honor, Arthur boomed. When these two married 25 years ago, Richard was already a rising star at a logistics firm. Catherine was a library assistant. The prenuptial agreement, which I have marked as Exhibit A, is standard and explicit. In the event of a divorce, Mrs. Sterling is entitled to a lump sum payment of $2 million, the deed to the Connecticut summer cottage, and retainment of her personal jewelry. All business assets, stocks, and future acquisitions made by Mr. Sterling remain his sole property. Arthur paused, letting the numbers sink in. $2 million was a lot of money to normal people. To Richard Sterling, it was what he spent on jet fuel in a month. We are generous people, Arthur continued. Mr. Sterling is willing to increase the lump sum to $5 million simply to expedite these proceedings and allow everyone to move on. We believe this is more than fair, given that Mrs. Sterling has not contributed financially to the household in 2 decades. Judge Wexler looked at the defense table. Miss Halloway? Do you contest the validity of the prenuptial agreement? The courtroom held its breath. This was the moment. Usually, the wife's lawyer would scream about duress or coercion or hidden assets. Beatrice Halloway didn't stand up. She stayed seated, adjusting her glasses. No, Your Honor, Beatrice said quietly. We do not contest the prenup. It is a valid legal document signed by both parties in 1999. Richard nearly choked on his water. Veronica nudged him, whispering loudly, See? I told you she was weak. Arthur blinked. He looked suspicious. It was too easy. You accept the terms? We accept the validity of the document, Beatrice corrected. However, we believe the definition of personal property requires clarification. Clarification? Judge Wexler asked. It seems straightforward. Mr. Sterling keeps the business. Mrs. Sterling keeps the house and the jewelry. Correct, Beatrice said. She finally stood up. She picked up a single piece of paper from her table. Mr. Penhaligon, in your opening statement, you described Sterling Hale Dynamics as an empire built solely by Mr. Richard Sterling. Is that correct? It is a matter of public record, Arthur scoffed. He is the CEO. He is the face of the company. And the Hale and Sterling Hale Dynamics? Beatrice asked innocently. Who is that? Richard rolled his eyes. He stood up, ignoring his lawyer's hand gesture to sit down. Hale was my partner, Jonathan Hale. He died 15 years ago. I bought his shares. I own 100% of the voting stock. This is a waste of time. Beatrice nodded slowly. Ah, yes. Jonathan Hale. A brilliant man, but a man with a lot of gambling debts, if I recall. Objection, Arthur shouted. Relevance? I am establishing the history of the assets, Your Honor, Beatrice said. It goes to the heart of the ownership claim. Overruled, Judge Wexler said, leaning forward. Continue, Miss Halloway. Beatrice turned to Catherine. Catherine, dear, could you please hand me the blue binder? Catherine reached into the briefcase and pulled out a blue binder. She handed it to Beatrice. When Jonathan Hale died, Beatrice said, walking toward the witness stand where Richard had practically seated himself, the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. This was 2009. The financial crash. You had no liquidity. The banks wouldn't lend to you. Is that correct, Mr. Sterling? Richard tightened his jaw. It was a tough time for everyone. I navigated us through it. You didn't have the money to buy Jonathan Hale's shares, Beatrice said, her voice hardening. The bank was going to foreclose on the company assets. You needed $4 million in cash, immediately, to secure the controlling interest and stop the liquidation. I found the money, Richard snapped. I'm a businessman. That's what I do. Where did you find it? Beatrice asked. Investors. Private equity. It was a long time ago. Did you take a loan? I don't recall the specifics of the transaction. Beatrice smiled. It wasn't a nice smile anymore. You don't recall where you got $4 million to save your empire? She opened the blue binder. Let me refresh your memory. You didn't go to a bank. You didn't go to private equity. You went to your wife. Richard scoffed. Catherine? She was a librarian. She didn't have $400, let alone $4 million. Actually, Beatrice said, pulling out a yellowed document, Catherine had exactly $4 million. An inheritance from her great-aunt in Cincinnati, a woman you never met. A woman whose estate settled exactly 3 days before the Sterling Hale bankruptcy deadline. The room went silent. Richard's face twitched. He remembered the aunt, he remembered the money. But that was a loan. A personal loan between husband and wife. I borrowed it, Richard said dismissively. And I paid it back. I paid for her clothes, her cars, her charity galas. I paid it back 10 times over. Did you? Beatrice asked. Because I have here a promissory note, signed by you, Richard Sterling, dated November 3rd, 2009. She handed the paper to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. Mr. Penhaligon, do you have a copy of this? The judge asked. Arthur looked frantic. He was shuffling papers. I have never seen this document. Read Clause 4B. Your Honor, Beatrice said. Judge Wexler adjusted his glasses. He read in silence for a moment. Then his eyebrows shot up so high they almost touched his hairline. He looked at Richard Sterling with a mixture of shock and pity. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, his voice low. Did you read this before you signed it? It was just a formality, Richard shouted. Catherine wrote it up. She said it was just for her records, so she wouldn't feel like she was just giving it away. It means nothing. On the contrary, Judge Wexler said, Clause 4B states, in exchange for this capital injection, the lender, Catherine Sterling, assumes ownership of the acquired shares, the Hale interest, as collateral until the principal is repaid in full with interest. So I owe her $4 million plus interest, Richard yelled. Fine, write her a check, Arthur. Give her 10 million. Who cares? Beatrice interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. Read the rest, Your Honor. The condition of repayment, Judge Wexler read aloud. Repayment must be made via a designated separate account within 5 years. If repayment is not made by November 3, 2014, the collateral, the Hale shares, permanently reverts to the lender. Furthermore, any stock splits, dividends, or subsidiary assets derived from said shares become the property of the lender. Beatrice turned to the room. Mr. Sterling never paid the money back into a separate account. He used joint household funds to pay for groceries and vacations, and claimed that was repayment. Legally, it was not. He defaulted on the loan in 2014. Richard stood up, his face purple. That's a lie. I own 100% of that company. No, Richard, Beatrice said softly. You own 49%. The Hale interest was 51%. When you defaulted, Catherine became the majority shareholder of Sterling Hale Dynamics. A gasp ripped through the courtroom. Veronica dropped her sunglasses. She has owned the controlling interest of your company for 10 years, Richard, Beatrice said. She just let you run it. Until today. Richard looked at Catherine. For the first time, the quiet woman in the navy blazer looked up. She locked eyes with him. And then, she offered a small, terrifyingly calm smile. But wait, Arthur Penhaligon stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. Even if that's true. The prenup says business assets remain the husband's. If she owns the shares, aren't they marital property subject to the prenup? The prenup applies to assets acquired during the marriage effectively, Beatrice countered. But this specific transaction was structured as a debt acquisition of an outside entity. However, there is a bigger problem for you, Mr. Penhaligon. Beatrice turned a page in the binder. Since 2015, Mr. Sterling has been moving assets out of Sterling Hale Dynamics and into offshore shell companies to avoid taxes and, presumably, to hide money from Catherine in the event of this very divorce. He moved the logistics, software patents. He moved the real estate holdings. That's standard business, Richard yelled. It is theft, Beatrice said. Because he was moving assets out of a company that he didn't majority own. He was stealing from the majority shareholder. He was stealing from Catherine. Beatrice looked at the judge. Your Honor, we are not asking for half of Richard's fortune. We are filing a countersuit for corporate embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. We are asking for the immediate removal of Richard Sterling as CEO and full restitution of all assets stolen from Catherine Sterling's company. The silence that fell was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Richard Sterling slumped into his chair. He looked at Veronica. Veronica looked at Richard, then at the judge, then at her phone. She was calculating. If he wasn't the billionaire, if he was actually an employee who had been stealing from his wife. She slowly took her hand off his arm. Is this true? Veronica whispered, her voice trembling. Richard, do you own the plane? Or does she? Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Catherine stood up. I own the plane, Veronica, and the house in the Hamptons, and the car you arrived in. She paused, smoothing her blazer. And I'm afraid I'm going to need the keys back. The courtroom was in a state of suspended animation. The revelation that Catherine Sterling technically owned the majority of her husband's company hung in the air like toxic smoke. Arthur Penhaligon, usually the picture of composure, was furiously whispering to an aide who had just run in with a laptop. Richard sat frozen, his eyes fixed on the promissory note that had just turned his empire into a house of cards. Order. Judge Wexler banged his gavel, though the room was already silent. Miss Holloway, you made a serious accusation before the recess. You accused Mr. Sterling of embezzlement. That is a criminal matter. It is, Your Honor, Beatrice replied, standing with the help of her cane. And we are prepared to prove it. We are not just looking at a breach of contract. We are looking at the systematic looting of a company by a minority shareholder who treated the corporate treasury as his personal piggy bank. Beatrice signaled to the back of the room. I would like to call our next witness, Mr. Simon Pendergast, forensic accountant. A man in a sharp gray suit walked in. He looked like a man who found joy in spreadsheets. He took the stand, swore the oath, and opened a laptop. Mr. Pendergast, Beatrice began. You have had access to the public filings of Sterling Hale Dynamics, as well as the miscellaneous expense reports that Mr. Sterling's team inadvertently included in the initial discovery phase. What did you find? Pendergast adjusted his glasses. I found a discrepancy of approximately $85 million over the last 3 years. Richard jumped up. That's overhead. Operational costs, fuel prices went up. Sit down, Mr. Sterling. Judge Wexler barked. One more outburst, and I will hold you in contempt. Pendergast continued, unfazed. We traced these operational costs to a series of LLCs registered in the Cayman Islands, specifically a company called Blue Horizon Consulting. And what does Blue Horizon Consulting do? Beatrice asked. According to the invoices, Pendergast said, projecting a document onto the courtroom screen, they provide logistics support and strategic advice. They bill Sterling Hale roughly $500,000 a month. And who owns Blue Horizon Consulting? We subpoenaed the bank records, Pendergast said. The ultimate beneficiary is listed as Veronica Miller. Every head in the room swiveled to Veronica. She gasped, clutching her Chanel bag. I don't know what that is. I just sign what Richard tells me to sign. Richard's face went white. He had used his mistress's name to hide the money, assuming she was too dim to notice and too loyal to care. It gets worse, Pendergast said. The company credit cards. There is a line item for employee wellness and retention. Last year, this budget line spent $1.2 million. On what? Beatrice asked. Medical procedures, Pendergast read from the sheet. Specifically, Dr. Eris Thorne, plastic surgeon, Beverly Hills. 2 rhinoplasties, 1 breast augmentation, and extensive dermatological treatments. Beatrice turned to Veronica. Miss Miller, you look lovely today. Tell me, is your appearance considered employee wellness for a shipping logistics company? The gallery erupted in murmurs. Veronica looked like a trapped animal. She turned to Richard, her voice shrill. You told me the insurance covered that. You said it was part of the executive health plan. It was, Richard hissed, sweat dripping down his temple. Technically, you were a consultant. A consultant? Beatrice interrupted. Miss Miller, have you ever consulted on shipping logistics? Do you know what a bill of lading is? No, Veronica stammered. I manage the atmosphere. The atmosphere? Beatrice repeated dryly. Mr. Pendergast, was there anything else? Yes, Pendergast said. The diamond ring Miss Miller is currently wearing. Veronica instinctively covered her left hand with her right. That item was purchased 6 months ago from Graf Diamonds in London, Pendergast stated. Cost, $650,000. It was expensed to the company under heavy machinery and drill parts. Laughter rippled through the courtroom. Even the stenographer cracked a smile. Drill parts? Beatrice mused. That is a very sparkly drill part, Miss Miller. Judge Wexler looked over his glasses at Richard. The look was withering. Mr. Sterling, are you telling this court that you categorized a wedding ring for your mistress as industrial machinery? Arthur Penhaligon stood up, looking defeated. Your Honor, these are accounting errors. My client delegates these tasks to subordinates. He cannot be expected to audit every line item. He signed the checks, Arthur. Judge Wexler said coldly. Miss Halloway, where are you going with this? Your Honor, Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a serious, dangerous tone. If Mr. Sterling purchased these items with company funds, and if the company belongs to the majority shareholder, my client, Catherine, then Mr. Sterling has not only embezzled funds, he has gifted stolen property to Miss Miller. Beatrice turned to Veronica. Miss Miller, are you aware that receiving stolen property is a felony in the state of New York, punishable by up to 7 years in prison? Veronica's eyes went wide. She stood up, knocking her chair back. Prison? She shrieked. I didn't steal anything. He gave it to me. He told me he was worth $4 billion. He lied, Beatrice said simply. He is worth nothing. He is millions of dollars in debt to his wife. And the jewelry you are wearing? It belongs to Sterling Hale Dynamics, which means it belongs to Catherine. Veronica looked at Richard. The adoration in her eyes was gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. Richard, she pleaded. Fix this. Tell them. Richard stared straight ahead, his jaw locked. He was doing the math. If he admitted the fraud, he went to jail. If he denied it, he had to throw Veronica under the bus. She knew, Richard said. his voice cold and flat. She knew the money came from the company accounts. She asked for it. She demanded it. The courtroom gasped. The billionaire had just used his mistress as a human shield. Veronica froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at the man she thought she loved, the man she had wrecked a marriage for, and saw him for what he truly was. A sinking ship willing to drown anyone to stay afloat for 5 more minutes. Recess. Judge Wexler banged the gavel. We will reconvene in 1 hour. And Miss Miller, don't leave the building. The hallway outside courtroom 4B was chaos. Cameras flashed through the glass of the double doors. Inside the secure waiting area, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Richard Sterling was pacing, screaming into his cell phone. Sell the Hamptons estate. I don't care if the market is down, get it liquid. I need cash in the Caymans by close of business. He paused. What do you mean the accounts are frozen? Who froze them? He slammed the phone against the wall, cracking the screen. Arthur Penhaligon sat on a bench, massaging his temples. Richard, stop. You can't move assets. The judge issued a temporary restraining order on all financial movements 5 minutes ago. If you try to move a cent, they'll put you in handcuffs before dinner. I am Richard Sterling, he roared. I built this. Catherine did nothing. She sat at home drinking tea while I fought the unions and the regulators. It's my money. It was never your money, Richard, Arthur said quietly. You borrowed it, and you got greedy. You thought she was too stupid to notice the contract. You were wrong. At the other end of the hallway, Veronica stood alone near the water cooler. She was shaking. She looked down at the massive diamond on her finger. It didn't look like a symbol of love anymore. It looked like a handcuff. She watched Richard screaming. She saw the vein bulging in his neck. She realized that if he went down, he was absolutely going to take her with him. She knew, he had said. She demanded it. Veronica made a decision. She took a deep breath, slid the ring off her finger, and walked past Richard. Where are you going? Richard snapped, grabbing her arm. We need to present a united front. Arthur is going to argue that you were a legitimate employee. Veronica yanked her arm away. Don't touch me. Excuse me? Richard's eyes narrowed. You listen to me, you little. No, you listen, Veronica hissed. Her voice wasn't the baby doll voice she used on the yacht. It was the voice of a girl from Queens who had scrapped her way up and wasn't going back down. I'm not going to jail for you. I'm not going to lose my youth in a cell because you were too cheap to use your own money. She turned and walked toward the small conference room where Catherine and Beatrice were sitting. Richard watched her go, stunned. Veronica, you walk through that door and you're dead to me. You get nothing. She didn't look back. She pushed the door open. Inside, Catherine was sipping a cup of lukewarm coffee. She looked up as Veronica entered. The air in the room shifted. The wife and the mistress. Beatrice looked up from her files. Miss Miller, you shouldn't be in here without counsel. I don't have counsel, Veronica said, her voice trembling. Richard's lawyer said he represents us, but I think he just represents him. That is a very astute observation, Beatrice said. Veronica walked to the table. She opened her hand. The $650,000 diamond ring clattered onto the wooden surface. She unclasped the diamond tennis bracelet from her wrist and dropped it next to the ring. She took off the earrings. I don't want them, Veronica said, tears finally spilling over. I didn't know. I swear to God, Mrs. Sterling, I didn't know it was your money. He told me you were mean. He told me you hated him. He told me he was the victim. Catherine looked at the pile of diamonds. They glittered under the fluorescent lights. Then she looked at Veronica. She didn't look angry. She looked tired. He tells everyone he is the victim. Veronica, Catherine said softly. That's his greatest talent. Selling the lie. I can help you, Veronica whispered. Beatrice leaned forward. Excuse me? I have his passwords, Veronica said. For the private email. The one he doesn't use on the company server. The one he uses to talk to the guys in Panama. Catherine raised an eyebrow. He made me memorize them because he was too paranoid to write them down, Veronica explained. He thought I was too stupid to understand what I was reading. And did you read them? Beatrice asked. Some of them, Veronica nodded. There's an email from last week about the Endgame Protocol. Beatrice and Catherine exchanged a look. What is the Endgame Protocol? He's planning to tank the company, Veronica said. If he loses the divorce, He set up a poison pill. He's going to sell the shipping routes to a rival firm in China for pennies on the dollar, just to make sure the stock goes to zero. So that, when you get the company, Mrs. Sterling, it'll be worthless. The silence in the room was chilling. Can you prove this? Beatrice asked, her pen hovering over her notepad. I can log in right now, Veronica said, but I want a deal. I want immunity. And I want a ticket to Paris. Catherine looked at the young woman. She saw the desperation. She saw the fear. We can't promise immunity, Catherine said. That's up to the district attorney. But if you help us stop him from destroying the company, I will make sure the judge knows you cooperated. And I won't press charges for the jewelry theft. Veronica nodded, wiping her eyes. Give me the laptop. When the court reconvened at 2 p.m., the dynamic had shifted tectonically. Richard Sterling swaggered in, looking slightly more composed. He had convinced himself that Veronica was just sulking in the bathroom, and that Arthur had found a loophole. He didn't notice that Veronica was sitting on the bench behind the plaintiff's table, behind Catherine. All rise, the bailiff called. Judge Wexler looked like a man who had missed his lunch. He was grumpy. Mr. Penhaligon, do you have any defense for the forensic evidence presented? We do, Your Honor, Arthur said. We argue that the expenditures, while extravagant, were necessary for the image of a global CEO. It is standard practice to— Your Honor, Beatrice interrupted, standing up abruptly. We have an emergency motion. Miss Holloway, don't interrupt, the judge warned. This cannot wait, Your Honor. It concerns the immediate destruction of the assets in question. We have evidence that the defendant is currently in the process of a scorched earth strategy. Richard stiffened. Explain, Judge Wexler said. Beatrice walked to the bench, handing over a USB drive. 10 minutes ago, we accessed a private email server used by Mr. Sterling. We found a scheduled execute order for 3 p.m. today, less than an hour from now. She turned to face Richard. The order authorizes the sale of Sterling Hale's primary trans-Pacific shipping routes to the Guangzhou Logistics Group for $10 million. Those routes are valued at $2 billion. The courtroom erupted. Reporters were typing furiously on their phones. That's a lie, Richard shouted, standing up. That is privileged corporate strategy. How did you get that? So you admit the email exists? Beatrice countered. It's not a sale. It's a strategic partnership, Richard stammered. It is corporate sabotage, Beatrice said. He is trying to gut the company so that when his wife takes ownership, she inherits a shell. He would rather burn it all down than let her win. Judge Wexler's face turned a shade of red that was dangerous. He looked at Richard Sterling not as a litigant, but as a criminal. Mr. Sterling, the judge said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. Is this true? Are you attempting to liquidate the primary assets of a company currently under dispute in my courtroom? It's my company, Richard screamed, losing all control. I built it. I can burn it if I want to. She's a librarian. She can't run a logistics firm. She'll ruin it anyway. I'm saving her the trouble. You are confessing to breach of fiduciary duty on the record, Arthur hissed, grabbing Richard's arm to pull him down. Richard shoved his lawyer away. Get off me, Arthur. You're useless. Richard turned to Catherine. You want it? You want the company? Fine. Take the debt. Take the unions. Take the lawsuits. You think it's easy being me? You think it's just parties and yachts? It's war. And you don't have the stomach for it, Catherine. Catherine stood up. She walked to the center of the aisle, meeting Richard in the middle. The courtroom was dead silent. You're right, Richard, Catherine said, her voice steady. I don't have the stomach for war. I don't enjoy crushing people. I don't enjoy lying. She took a step closer. But I do know how to read. And I read the employee surveys you threw in the trash. I read the safety reports you ignored. I read the budget proposals from the engineers you fired because they told you the truth. She looked him in the eye. You didn't build this company, Richard. You wrote it. You rode the hard work of thousands of people, and you skimmed the cream off the top to buy diamonds for women who hate you. The company isn't the problem. You are. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, we move for the immediate removal of Richard Sterling as CEO, effective this second. We ask that security be dispatched to the Sterling Hale headquarters to secure the servers before his cronies can delete anything else. And, she paused, looking back at Veronica, then at Richard. And we ask that Mr. Sterling be remanded into custody pending a criminal investigation into grand larceny and corporate fraud. He is a flight risk. He has a plane fueled on the tarmac at Teterboro right now. Flight risk? Richard laughed. I'm an American icon. I'm not going anywhere. Mr. Pendergast? Beatrice called out. The accountant stood up again. We tracked a wire transfer initiated 20 minutes ago. $5 million to an account in a non-extradition country. And a flight plan was filed for the private jet. Destination, Dubai. Richard's mouth fell open. He looked at his phone. The transfer was supposed to be untraceable. Judge Wexler slammed the gavel down. It sounded like a gunshot. Motion granted. Mr. Sterling, you are stripped of all executive powers immediately. Your assets are frozen. And given the attempt to flee, the judge pointed to the bailiffs. Take him into custody. Richard Sterling, the King of Wall Street, watched as two officers approached him. He looked at Arthur. Arthur closed his briefcase and looked away. He looked at Veronica. She was looking at the floor, wiping her eyes. He looked at Catherine. She was watching him, her face completely calm. Catherine, he shouted as the officers grabbed his arms. Catherine, don't do this. We can make a deal. Baby, please, I can change. Catherine. The doors swung open. The cameras outside went wild as the billionaire was marched out, not to his limo, but to a waiting police van. Inside the courtroom, silence fell again. Catherine let out a long breath. She slumped slightly, the adrenaline fading. Beatrice put a hand on her shoulder. It's not over yet, Beatrice whispered. Now you have to run the company. Catherine straightened her jacket. She picked up her battered leather briefcase. I know, she said. First thing tomorrow, we're rehiring the engineers. The morning after Richard Sterling's arrest, the stock of Sterling Hale Dynamics plummeted by 18%. The sharks were circling. Wall Street analysts were predicting a total collapse. They said the company couldn't survive without its visionary leader. They said a housewife couldn't steer a multi-billion-dollar ship through a storm. At 9 a.m. sharp, the board of directors convened in the glass-walled conference room on the 40th floor. It was a room filled with men in gray suits, men Richard had handpicked. Men who played golf with him, laughed at his jokes, and helped him hide the money. Leading the pack was Preston Galloway, the chairman of the board. He was a bloated man with a red face and a loud voice. Gentlemen, Preston boomed, slamming a file on the table. We have a crisis. The banks are calling in the loans. The suppliers are nervous. We need to stabilize the ship. I've already drafted a press release stating that the board is taking emergency control and looking for a buyer. A buyer? Asked a younger board member. But the company belongs to Mrs. Sterling now. Mrs. Sterling is a figurehead, Preston scoffed. She's a lovely woman, I'm sure, but she doesn't know a supply chain from a pearl necklace. We'll offer her a payout, pat her on the head, and sell the scraps to the Chinese. It's the only way to save our bonuses. The heavy oak doors swung open. Catherine Sterling walked in. She wasn't wearing the navy blazer from court. She was wearing a crisp white suit, sharp and immaculate. Behind her walked Beatrice Halloway, and behind Beatrice walked a young man in a hoodie. Dave, the lead engineer Richard had fired 3 months ago for asking too many questions. Good morning, gentlemen, Catherine said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it stopped the conversation dead. Preston stood up, putting on a fake, patronizing smile. Catherine, my dear, this is a closed meeting. You really shouldn't be here. You've been through a terrible ordeal. Why don't you go home, rest, and let the men handle the business? Catherine didn't stop walking until she reached the head of the table, Richard's chair. She looked at it for a moment. Then, she pushed it aside and remained standing. I am not here to rest, Preston, she said. I am here to accept your resignations. The room went deadly silent. Preston laughed. A nervous, sputtering laugh. Resignations? Catherine, be reasonable. You can't run this company. You don't understand the complexities of global logistics. Richard was the genius. You were. Well, you were the support system. Catherine opened her briefcase. She pulled out a stack of files. Let's talk about complexities, Preston, she said, opening the first file. Let's talk about the North Atlantic route inefficiency. For 3 years, our ships have been taking a longer route to Rotterdam to burn more fuel. Why? Because the fuel supplier, Oceanic Petroleum, pays a kickback to this board. Preston's face went from red to pale white. I don't know what you're talking about. I do, Catherine said, because I read the invoices. I read them every night while Richard was out with his consultants. I noticed that we pay 20% above market rate for fuel. That ends today. She threw another file on the table. And the software integration project? The one that's 2 years behind schedule and 50 million over budget? Richard fired the engineers who tried to fix it because they told him his timeline was impossible. Dave here, she gestured to the young man in the hoodie, is going to fix it in 3 months because he actually knows how to code. And you're going to give him the budget you were using for your executive retreats in Aspen. The board members looked at each other. They realized, with a dawning horror, that the quiet wife in the background had been watching everything. Now, Catherine said, her voice hardening, I have a list here. Preston Galloway, Simon Vance, Bill Henderson. You 3 knew about the shell companies. You signed the approvals. We were misled, Preston shouted. Richard lied to us too. You didn't ask questions because the checks cleared, Catherine said. Security is waiting in the hallway. You have 10 minutes to clear out your desks, leave your company phones and laptops. You can't do this, Preston yelled. The shareholders will revolt. The stock will tank. The stock is already tanking because the market thinks this company is run by thieves, Catherine countered. When I announce that I've cleaned house and rehired the competent staff you fired, the stock will recover. She leaned forward, placing her hands on the table. Get out. Preston looked at the other men. Nobody moved to help him. He grabbed his jacket, muttered a curse, and stormed out. The other 2 followed, heads bowed. Catherine looked at the remaining board members, the ones who hadn't been part of the inner circle, the ones who looked terrified. Gentlemen, Catherine said, sitting down at the head of the table. Now that the garbage has been taken out, let's get to work. Dave, pull up the schematics. 6 months later, the visiting room at the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville was stark, gray, and smelled of bleach. Richard Sterling sat on one side of the plexiglass. He looked 20 years older. His hair, once dyed a rich chestnut, was now entirely gray and thinning. The bespoke Italian suits were gone, replaced by a beige jumpsuit that didn't fit. He drummed his fingers on the metal counter, waiting. When the door opened, he sat up straighter. He tried to summon some of the old arrogance, the old king of Wall Street charm. Catherine sat down on the other side. She looked radiant. She wasn't wearing jewelry, just a simple blouse, but she carried herself with an air of peace that Richard had never seen before. You came, Richard said, a small smile playing on his lips. I knew you would. You miss me, don't you, Kath? The house is too big, isn't it? Catherine picked up the phone receiver. Richard did the same. I'm not here to talk about the house, Richard, she said calmly. I'm here because your lawyer said you refused to sign the final divorce decree unless I brought it personally. Richard's smile faltered. Come on, don't be like that. Look, I've been thinking. I can help you. I see the news. Sterling Hale stock is up 30%. Beginner's luck. You're going to hit a wall, Catherine. You need me. I can consult from in here. We can be partners again. Catherine looked at him with genuine pity. We were never partners, Richard. I was your prop. And the company is doing fine. Better than fine. We actually pay our taxes now. Richard leaned in, his eyes desperate. And what about Veronica? Huh? Did you destroy her too? Did you crush that poor girl just to spite me? Veronica is fine, Catherine said. Richard blinked. What? She's working, Catherine said. She's studying for her real estate license. She testified against you, Richard. She gave us the passwords. In exchange, I paid for her tuition. She's trying to be a better person. Richard's face twisted in rage. She betrayed me. After everything I gave her, you gave her stolen money and a fake life, Catherine said. She woke up. It's time you did too. She slid the papers through the slot. Sign the papers, Richard. Let it go. Richard looked at the document. Sterling v. Sterling. Final dissolution. His hands shook. He realized, for the first time, that there was no coming back. There was no secret account waiting for him. There was no yacht. There was no fixer coming to save him. He was just a man in a cage who had thrown away a woman who would have walked through fire for him, if only he had been honest. If I sign this, Richard whispered, his voice cracking, will you come visit me again? Catherine watched him. She remembered the early days, the days before the money, when they ate takeout on the floor of a studio apartment. She remembered the love. But she also remembered the lies, the disrespect, the other women, the theft. No, Richard, she said softly. I won't. Richard stared at her. A single tear rolled down his cheek. He picked up the pen. He signed. Catherine took the papers back. She stood up. Goodbye, Richard. She turned and walked toward the exit. Catherine, he shouted, slamming his hand against the glass. Catherine, wait, I'm sorry. She didn't look back. The heavy steel door clanged shut behind her, sealing the silence. Outside, the air was crisp and cold. The sun was breaking through the clouds. Beatrice Holloway was waiting by the car, a sensible sedan, not a limousine. Done? Beatrice asked. Done, Catherine said. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the fresh air. She felt lighter than she had in 20 years. The office called, Beatrice said, opening the door. The expansion into green energy shipping was approved. The board wants to know if you want to lead the press conference. Catherine smiled. It wasn't the shy smile of the librarian anymore. It was the smile of a CEO. Tell them I'll be there in an hour, Catherine said. But first, let's stop for ice cream. I feel like celebrating. They drove off, leaving the prison and the past in the rearview mirror. Catherine Sterling had walked into court as a victim, but she had walked out as a legend. And that is the story of how Richard Sterling, a man who thought he could buy the world, ended up with nothing but a beige jumpsuit and a bitter memory. He underestimated the one person he should have feared the most. The quiet wife who knew where the bodies were buried. It's a powerful reminder that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes, it's just someone gathering their ammunition. Catherine didn't scream, she didn't fight dirty, and she didn't lose her dignity. She just waited for the perfect moment to tell the truth. In a world full of Richards, be a Catherine. Know your worth, read the fine print, and never, ever let anyone convince you that you're just a spectator in your own life. Wow, what a ride. If Catherine's victory gave you goosebumps, do me a favor, smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Richard deserved a second chance? Or did he get exactly what was coming to him? And what would you have done if you were in Catherine's shoes? Let me know down below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next juicy saga. I've got a story coming up next week about a lottery winner who hid his ticket from his greedy family. Trust me, you don't want to miss that one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.